I guess we're ready to start. Oh, okay. Yep.
They have to have somebody, and I try to relieve them a little bit.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started since it's almost 10:30. So this morning we're continuing with our study in 1 Samuel, and we're going to look at chapters 20 through 22. Am I as loud as I sound? Three chapters. I don't know that we're going to be able to get through all this in 30 minutes, but I'll give it a shot. I'm going to start out this morning. Right around July 4th, I kind of randomly decided to reread this book that I've enjoyed by Joseph Ellis. He's a historian who focuses on a lot of early American history, and it's just a real short book. He goes through like 6 events in the early formation of our country that he thinks are kind of pivotal events. Things like there was a dinner deal that Thomas Jefferson, he invited over James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and kind of had this wheeling and dealing going on, and that kind of resulted in the reason why Washington, D.C. was founded on the Potomac in the South. But one of the things a few things that I got from this book, or from some of the historical things I've studied before, that I was going to mention before we jump into today's lesson. You know, a lot of these historical figures, obviously, they didn't know the future, right? Now, there might be a little bit of a breakdown in this analogy between, our American history and biblical history in some ways. But, in general, historical figures don't know what's going to happen. They're living these events in real time. It's a little bit unfair at times. We have this ability, we can look back now and see and know what the end was going to be and kind of look at it and think, well, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? Well, it's because they were living it in real time. We've got the advantage of hindsight. The other thing is we see historical figures a lot of times in very simple terms, good or bad. And there are certainly characters that are like that. We have that in history, certainly in Scripture. There are some people that are just bad or good, right? But for the most part, I would argue that the vast majority of us, and people back then, were much more complicated than that. And it wasn't just simple, they were good or bad, right? And I kind of mentioned this not to make too much of it, we'll see this in a minute. But there's times when some characters that we have in Scripture will do some action that we think, that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. And the Bible just kind of says what they did. It doesn't necessarily always offer commentary on the right or wrong of it. It just says, this is what happened. And I think it just kind of goes to show that, a lot of the folks that we study, David is a good example. was a great man. Obviously, though, he did have his faults. We're not going to study it this quarter, but you can all think of Bathsheba. And again, it's just kind of something to maybe think through, right, as we go through some of the lesson that we're going to go through here. So at this point, as a reminder, Saul has tried to kill David with a spear at least twice, maybe more. He has sent his men to go capture David and to ultimately put him to death. So naturally, I think David's feeling a little bit of the heat here, right? So he's got this dilemma, and we're going to jump into 1 Samuel 20. When David fled from Naioth and Ramah, and he came and said before Jonathan, so he had already fled, and now he's kind of going back to see Jonathan, and he says, "What have I done? What is my guilt? What is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And you can understand why David feels this way. You think of all that David has accomplished, the loyalty he's shown. He's defeated Goliath. And yet here is Saul trying to kill him. And David is naturally having this crisis of, what have I done? Right? Natural human reaction. Jonathan, maybe a natural human reaction as well, says, "Oh, far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." So Jonathan, to me, seems to have a bit of this naive, maybe, thought that, oh, it's going to be okay. If my father's going to try to kill you, I guess again, because he's already done it multiple times, oh, he'll let me know first. I'm his son. He's going to let me know, and then, I can warn you, or, it's going to be okay. And, I thought to myself, it's easy when you're in Jonathan's position, maybe, and I don't think Jonathan's being dismissive per se, but maybe he doesn't have the same sense of urgency that David has, because it's not Jonathan's neck on the line, so to speak. And I can relate this, maybe not a great relation or analogy, but I can relate this a bit sometimes to my job when sometimes if we have an application or a system that goes down, they have one of these calls where they bring in a bunch of people to help troubleshoot. And maybe the person that's directly supporting the application, obviously they're going to be on there. And I found when I get called into one of those calls, but it's not my application to support, and I'm there kind of more as just, to kind of help maybe find some resolution, it's much easier for me on those calls to kind of sit back knowing that it's not me that's in the firing line, that it's like, oh, I'm here just to help. But I've been on those calls before when it's something that I support that's broken, and leadership's wanting to know when it's going to get fixed. And there's a whole lot more pressure when it's your neck on the line versus when you're just there to help out. And I kind of see this a bit here with David and Jonathan. Again, I don't think Jonathan's being necessarily dismissive, but maybe he's not really having that sense of urgency that, unfortunately, David's feeling. So, David, he's like, look, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, right? Because we've already studied about this relationship between Jonathan and David, and we're going to get into it even more today, this close relationship they had. So, David, I think pretty perceptive, says, here's what Saul's going to say. He's going to say, hey, don't let Jonathan know about this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is a step between me and death. And when I read that, you can just feel in David the fear, the uncertainty, the stress of like, I'm just one step away from death. And when I read this, I thought, well, wait a minute. Isn't this David who defeated Goliath, that bravely went out before, the Philistines and challenged Goliath? I mean, obviously, David's a brave person. There's no doubt about that. And yet here he is. You can just feel this sense of fear within him. And why would that be different. And maybe one possibility is this. David, when he was going against Goliath, his faith in God, he knew that God was with him and was going to take care of him. He was going against the Philistines and their enemy, and Goliath. But now who is he going against in a manner of speaking? God's anointed. And David will use that expression throughout the remainder of 1 Samuel. He'll refer to Saul as God's anointed. And I think the problem here for David is that he was brave and went up against Goliath because that was just kind of, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but it was almost natural that he was going against God's enemy. And here, wait a minute, this is God's anointed that's after me. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty for David because, rightfully so, he doesn't know what's going on. Why am I having to go through this?
Well, and that's part of the issue. Going against Goliath, he went in with the intention of killing him. He had the capability to do that. Now he doesn't want to kill Saul, and he specifically makes a point not to kill him further on, but he has no control over making the reconciliation that he needs.
Yeah. Yep. So I think, David is in definitely this situation that, I can understand that it's just a very uncertain situation. It makes no sense to him. So, all right, now they got to come up with some type of plan here. They want to find out, is Saul still trying to kill David or not? So Jonathan comes up with a plan and says, okay, tomorrow is a new moon. And as I understand it, in the Jewish culture back then, they would have a new moon festival. Their calendar was based on the lunar calendar. So they would have like a festival, if you want to call it that, on the first new moon. And so Jonathan's like, okay, that's coming up. Here's the idea. Don't come, talking to David, don't show up, and your seat's going to be empty, right? Because if you remember, David is in the service in the court of Saul. So he would naturally be expected to be there. But Jonathan tells him, don't come in. The seat will be empty. And then on the third day, go down quickly to the place that you hid yourself when the matter was in hand and remain there beside the stone heap. So he's telling him, hey, don't come to the feast. Go out to this location, right, that's agreed upon. And then in verse 20 it says, and Jonathan tells him, I will shoot 3 arrows as though I shot out at a mark. And I'm going to have a boy with me, and I'm going to tell him to go get those arrows. And if I tell him, hey, they're off to the side, take them. That's the signal that everything's going to be okay. Saul is still not going after David, and it's okay for David to come back. But if he sends him out further and tells the boy, hey, go out past, I might be jumping ahead. Yeah. The arrows are beyond you, he tells the boy, right? If he says that, that means the Lord has said, go away, David. Get out of here. You're in danger. So they kind of come up with this plan, right? Now, before we see how that works out, there's kind of this bit of an interlude here where, again, we're seeing this relationship between Jonathan and David and this idea of a covenant. This was actually first mentioned, I believe it was back in chapter 18, when it talks about a covenant between David and Jonathan. And it says, this is Jonathan speaking, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I'm still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as his own soul. So this covenant, it appears, from what I understand, it appears that Jonathan knows that the kingdom is going to be given over to David. It's going to be taken away from Saul, his father, and it's going to be given over to David, which kind of leaves Jonathan in a little bit of an awkward position as Saul's son, right? He would have been the heir. But apparently Jonathan, in his faith in the Lord and knows that David is now the new anointed, he's all in on it. He's like, okay, God's made the decision. David, you're going to be the king. I'm with you. And it appears that maybe the idea here with this covenant is that when David comes into power, that somehow Jonathan would still be in service in the kingdom in some way, whether that would be a second in command or something like that. Not sure. Now, I read that, and again, maybe this is kind of going back to what I started off with about being able to kind of look back in time and see how things turn out. But I think to myself, boy, that sure seems idealistic. How many times in history do you have a transition of power when it's just this nice, peaceful transition? We've have that in our country, but if you go back in time to this time, transitions of power like this, especially if you're going from one bloodline to another, were typically pretty violent. And if you then took power, you wanted to make sure nobody else was going to have the ability to challenge that, so you'd have them killed off. But apparently David and Jonathan think that this can be done. Again, maybe it's idealistic. I don't know. We know, I think, and we'll see at the end of the quarter that that is certainly not the way it's going to play out. But jumping ahead. All right, so now they've got the plan. We've seen this covenant that they have, that Jonathan and David have. Let's see how it plays out. So David hides himself in the field when the new moon came. Saul comes into the feast to eat, and he notices. He sits at his seat. Jonathan's there. Abner's there. David's place is empty. First day. Saul doesn't seem to say anything. He thinks to himself, oh, okay, something's happened. He's probably unclean. That's got to be what it is. He's not clean. And as I understand it in Jewish culture, if you were unclean, and you could be unclean for a number of reasons, maybe you had touched something that was unclean, but typically if you washed and then after a day, you could come back into society, right? So I'm sure what Saul's thinking here is, oh yeah, David, he's unclean for some reason, ceremonial unclean. He'll be here tomorrow. Second day. The day after the new moon, David's place was still empty. Now Saul's starting to wonder. So he says to Jonathan, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Notice he doesn't say David, he calls him son of Jesse. Seems to be a little dismissive of David, I would say. Doesn't even call him by name. But he notices that David's not there. And Jonathan, and I kind of had skipped over some of the scriptures for this, but Jonathan's plan was to tell his father, when he asked, that David's oldest brother had asked urgently that David come back to Bethlehem for the feast. So they had this all kind of worked out. They had their story worked out. And Jonathan answers Saul. He says, well, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem, so to go back home. Saul is having none of this. Right? So we're told Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I know that you've chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he will surely die. So, to say that Saul is really kind of losing it would be an understatement, right? So he's now at the point of accusing Jonathan of being, a traitor. He's even gone as far as to call his wife, Jonathan's mother, basically a prostitute. So he he seems to be telling Jonathan here in verse 31, look, as long as David's around in the picture, you're not going to get to be the king, right? So send him here. He's going to die. Well, what does Jonathan say? So Jonathan's like, obviously here, he's like, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father determined to put David to death. So here again, we have Saul and a spear, throwing it, this time at Jonathan. So he's already tried to kill David. Now he's tried to kill his own son. And I chuckle a bit at that last sentence. So Jonathan knew that his father determined to put David to death. You think? That's maybe slightly of an understatement, but they know for sure now. Saul's intent is to kill David. He is not relenting. So in the morning, Jonathan goes out to the field. He's got the boy with him. Tells the boy, I'm going to shoot the arrows. And he shoots the arrows beyond. And he tells the boy, hey, aren't the arrows beyond you? So this is the signal, right? This is the signal to David, who's hiding out there watching this, to know, I got to get out. Saul's still after me. I got to get out of here. Jonathan sends the boy away. And this is interesting to me because they had gone to this elaborate plan to hide David and, do this shooting of the arrows where if anybody was watching, I guess, they wouldn't know what's going on. But it says, David rose from beside the stone heap, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed 3 times. They kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between you and me and between our offspring forever. For he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And I thought, wow. And they went to all this effort to kind of be, hiding what was going on, and then they have this big farewell. And the only thing I can think of is that, when they made the plan originally, maybe they didn't know, Jonathan didn't know if somebody was going to come out with him and follow along. So they kind of had to do this secretive, shooting of the arrows. And then possibly when it came time, there was nobody there but Jonathan and the boy. So once Jonathan sends the boy away, both he and David know that there's no one else around. So they have this big, goodbye. Not sure. I don't know. For some reason, I thought it was interesting. All right, so moving on to the next chapter. So David flees, and he's going to flee to Nob, where I believe at this point, this is close to where the tabernacle's at. And Amalek the priest. Amalek came to meet David trembling, saying, why are you alone and no one with you? Now, why would he be afraid when he sees David there alone? The only thing I can think of is, normally in the position that David was in Saul's court, he probably would have always had some type of entourage or something with him. But now here it is, David all by himself showing up. And I guess that kind of causes Amalek to go, what's going on here? Why is David by himself? So he's a little nervous. So what does David tell him? He says, well, the king has charged me with the matter and said to me, let no one know anything about the matter which I'm sending to you, in which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. So David has this story that the king has now sent him on this mission. And the author of the book we've been using, he makes the point that, if the king that David's referring to is the Lord, then what David's saying possibly is true. I don't know. That doesn't sit with me. I don't think that's really what's going on here. I think David's he's trying to kind of cover things, right? And he's saying Saul has sent him on this secret mission, and that's why he's there all by himself. And so that's why when I was kind of leading into today's lesson and talking about sometimes you see this behavior by people that we know are good, upstanding people like David, and yet, here he is coming up with this lie about why he's there. And the Bible doesn't necessarily say that what David did here was right. It just records it. This is what happened. Okay? So David asked him, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever's here. And the priest answered David, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread. So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. So what they would do, the priest would bake bread, and as I understand it, it was replaced, I think, every Sabbath. They would have I think it was 12 loaves of bread. And the priest, and this is in Leviticus, it's instructed that this practice of having the bread of the presence there in the tabernacle. But the bread can then be used or eaten by the priest. David's not a priest. It's not lawful for him to eat the bread. And you may remember who makes reference to this much later on. Jesus. When his disciples are walking through the field on the Sabbath and they're plucking the heads of grain to have something to eat, the Pharisees kind of call them out, like, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. Jesus refers back to this event and says, hey, didn't you hear about when David was on the run and he ate the bread of the presence, which he wasn't allowed to do? Now, we're then told, a little bit of maybe foreshadowing here, there's a certain man of the servants of Saul that was there that day, detained before the Lord. Not sure exactly what that means. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdmen. So Edom, those would be the descendants of Esau. Their territory was down on the southern part of Israel. A little bit of a tension, let's say, between Israel and Edom, to the point we were told earlier in Samuel that Saul had done some battle with the Edomites and obviously had won that. And it's possible that Doeg, maybe he was forced into servitude, not really sure, but he's the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And we're kind of just given this brief glimpse here. And it's going to come back if I can get to it before time runs out. So David says, okay, I don't even have a spear or a sword because it requires so much haste. And the priest says, well, just the irony, I guess, is the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it's here wrapped in cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, for there is none like it. And David said, hey, there's none like it, give it to me. So apparently David was in such haste when he fled. Not only didn't have food, he didn't have any weapon on hand. And I kind of think, well, he and Jonathan had kind of planned all this. You would think maybe that was something that would have come up, that David would have thought, oh, if I'm signaled to go flee, I need to have some provisions, maybe some weapon. But I think it just goes to show that the state that David was in and the haste in which he fled. So now David continues fleeing. He rises up, goes to Gath, which, if you remember, Gath is what? It's the hometown of Goliath. So David has now fled to the Philistines. Again, it just kind of shows you the desperate situation that David's in. And the people, the Philistines, they kind of start talking, going, hey, isn't this David, the king of the land? It's interesting they refer to him as the king of the land, whether that was just kind of a saying or maybe they had heard as well that David had been anointed by Samuel and was going to be the future king. Not sure. But they're telling their king, Achish, they're saying, hey, wait a minute. This is the guy that they sing about, right? That Saul struck down his thousands and David is 10,000s. That phrase that last week when Mike was teaching, we talked about, and it just how much that phrase enraged Saul, right? Because people were giving David more credit. And, David's kind of hearing about this, and now he's like going, oh boy. So in verse 13, we're told he changes his behavior and starts to pretend that he's insane. So, things are desperate for David, and it's at the point where he's now fled to the Philistines. Maybe he went there because he thought that's not a place that Saul would expect him to go. But now, to kind of get away from some of the attention that the Philistines are giving him, he starts to have to act insane. And I like this little scripture that we have here, where Achish, the king of Gath, says to his servants, behold, you see, this man is mad. Why have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen, that you have brought this fellow to me to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? I love that phrase where he says, do I lack madmen? Like, I don't know, what kind of city is this? But he's somewhat dismissive, I guess, of David, and like, okay, look, this dude's crazy. I'm not even gonna worry about him. Yeah, he's kind of my enemy, and he killed our, warrior Goliath, but he kind of just dismisses David as just some madman. So now David is gonna flee again. This time he's going back to the cave of Adullam, which is about, if I remember right, it's about 15 miles from Bethlehem. That's David's home. So now he's kind of fleeing back into Israel. And when he does that, obviously word gets out. And we're told that when his brothers and all his family's house heard this, they came down there to meet him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them, and there were with him about 400 men. And when I read that, it's hard for me not to think of Jesus. Who were the ones that followed Jesus typically? Was it the rich and the powerful? No, there might have been a few. But for the most part, it was the outcast of society, right? And to see the same thing here with David, it's, the people that are in desperate need, they see this leader, David, and they're just naturally drawn to him and kind of form this little group of over 400 men. Now we're going to see why Doeg the Edomite was mentioned in the preceding chapter. And the story just gets worse for Saul. So Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in hand, with all of his servants standing around him. Here we are. What's Saul doing? He's got a spear in hand. I don't know what it is with Saul and spears, but it's like, is this thing glued to him? I think part of it is, I see him as it's maybe insecurity, right? We're told that Saul is heads and shoulders above everybody else. I mean, he looked the part of a leader. Now, we know he's not, and I think it probably was apparent to a lot of other folks that he wasn't. And I guess maybe, does he just walk around continually with a spear in his hand? Maybe to kind of project this, vision of him as this strong leader. So, jumping down to verse 8. Saul's telling the men that are around him, why have all of you conspired against me? No one discloses to me that my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. Again, he continues to just call him the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as in this day. Few things jump out to me in that passage. What a whiner, first off, Saul, having a little pity party for himself. Who does he blame? Jonathan. That his son has stirred up his servant David against him to lie in wait. What? David's not lying in wait. David's hiding in a cave. He's not sitting there looking to ambush Saul. Just the weakness of Saul, the paranoia. It's just sad, tragic figure. So now, I guess Doeg is, well, obviously Doeg is there. And I guess he sees this maybe as his opportunity and says, hey, you know what? I saw the son of Jesse come to Nob, to Amalek, the son of Atib, and he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So notice that, Doeg appears to be like, all right, I can take advantage of this situation because I know something. So the king summons Amalek the priest and really the whole priesthood there at Nob, and they all come to the king. And Saul says to them, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as to this day? So again, Saul, everybody's out to get him. Everyone's conspiring against him. Now it's the priest. He accuses them of aiding, I guess, and abetting the enemy, as we would say, who's risen up against him, lying in wait, which is not, in fact, the case. All right, so he's now accusing the priest. And Amalek has a great answer. All right, so he answers Saul, and he says, and who among all of your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and honored in your house? So, I just feel like, he's saying, look, why would I be suspicious of David? He's your son-in-law. He's faithful. He's captain of your bodyguard, honored in your house. Is today the first time I've inquired for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant knows nothing of all this, much or little. Right? It makes perfect sense. Saul, if he was stable at all, would agree with this argument that Amalek's making. It's like, look, David is an honored person in your household. Why would I be suspicious of him when he comes to visit and not give him aid? It just gets worse. Saul just double downs on his dysfunction, to say the least here. He says, you shall surely die, Amalek, you and all of your father's house. And the king said to the guard about him, turn, kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priest of the Lord. So at least some of Saul's men apparently have some sense. And they're like, no, sorry, king, we're not gonna go kill these priests, right, of God, just because you think they're conspiring against you, right? Unfortunately, it just keeps getting worse. So the king says to Doeg, why he decided to call Doeg, I don't know. Maybe because Doeg's the one that brought it up, that Amalek the priest had helped. But he says, you turn and strike the priest. Apparently, Doeg's, hey, got no problem with that, sure. So he turns, he strikes down the priest. On that day, he kills 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. So 85 of the priests. Not only that, if that wasn't bad enough, then he goes to Nob, the city of the priests, and he puts it to sword, killing both men and women, children, infant, ox, donkey, sheep. He puts to the sword. Pretty depraved individual here, to say the least. I keep looking at the time going, I'm surprised they haven't rung the bell, but okay. I'm going to finish this, I guess, in time. When the priests are slain, one of them escapes, Abiathar. He flees and he gets to where David is located. And this is the very end of the chapter, and we'll wrap it up with this. And David says to Abner, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me and do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. Now, I really like that. I like the attitude that David has. Was David responsible for the slaying of the priest? No, I mean, that was Saul and Doeg, right? Ultimately, they're the ones who were responsible. But it's telling to me that David, and talks about his character, that the way he sees it is he's like, man, I fled to them for help. I went to go get help, and now I've brought this down on the priest, and it's my fault that they were killed. And I just think that goes to speak so much to David's character, that he feels this responsibility for these priests, even though I think you can objectively say it wasn't David's fault, right? And yet he feels this remorse for what happened. And if you contrast that with Saul and Saul's depravity, and then here David, on the other hand, complete 180-degree difference. And he offers aid, right? He tells the priest, stay with me, don't be afraid, I'm going to take care of you. And again, to me, it just speaks about David and who he is. And, I kind of mentioned this kind of leading into today's lesson. Not that we're going to get into the whole story of David and Bathsheba. That's in 2 Samuel. But, sometimes it's easy to look at, someone like David, and you can kind of look at that situation with David and Bathsheba. And he ended up, if you remember, and I'm sure you all do, what does he do to cover up the sin because Bathsheba gets pregnant? Is he sends Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba's husband, into a dangerous situation, sets him up to be killed, to kind of try to cover up. And then David is confronted, I believe it was by Nathan, the prophet, right? Yeah. In one of my favorite stories in the Bible is when Nathan calls David out with that story of the little ewe lamb, and that had to speak to David as a shepherd. And when Nathan tells him that story, and David is so enraged that rich man would kill this poor man's lamb to feed this little lamb that this poor man treated like a pet, I guess. And David is so enraged at that, it's like, this guy's going to die. And when Nathan tells him, you are that man, and just that moment, I can't imagine what that would have been like. But what's David's reaction at that moment? He is heartbroken because he knows what he's done is wrong. And again, David, to me, is he perfect? Absolutely not. But you get glimpses of his character throughout 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and you can see why he's called a man after God's own heart. Well, that's the end of the chapter, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that, and then Mike will carry on next week with the next lesson. Appreciate your attendance.